For those of you new to producing tropical and foliage plants or interested in learning more about the category in general, it can be a pretty steep learning curve. Maybe you have a long history in bedding plants, perennials, vegetables, herbs, even ornamentals. But what I've learned is that the tropical and foliage market is quite different. There is certainly overlap from a production standpoint, but the differences are really numerous. You'll potentially deal with different pests and diseases, which we've covered in past episodes with my guest today. And I encourage you to jump back in and check those out. I'll put the links to the archived video and podcast in the show notes. But this time, my guest is here to talk to us about something a little bit different, which is different types of starter material from which you'll begin your tropical and foliage crops. I'm Bill Calkins with Tech on Demand, and thankfully, my guest has a ton of experience producing tropical plants from a diverse range of starter materials and has gone through the growing pains required for successful growing from start to finish. Please welcome Andrew Britton, a true tropical plant production expert who's been involved in a range of activities in greenhouses, from head grower to propagation manager, even a sales manager and technical manager with some of the largest greenhouses in North America. He's also a fantastic communicator with real world experience that he can share in practical sense that can help you have the best success with these plants in your greenhouse. Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here.
So why don't you go ahead and share your screen and take us on a little bit of a tour through different types of starter material that the listeners and viewers might encounter in this wild world of tropical foliage plants. And before we get started, I have to admit that there's at least one on this list that I have never even heard of. So I guarantee you I'll be taking notes throughout your talk and learning along with the viewers and listeners. So Andrew, the floor is yours.
Great. So there are quite a few similarities in the starter material for tropicals that there are in the bedding plant side of things, but then there are some that are definitely quite different. The one that's most common in both is unrooted cuttings. Now, typically on the bedding plant side of things, this will be a growing tip. When you get into the foliage side of things, especially things like pothos or philodendrons, you'll look at getting stem cuttings where you'll get one cutting, one leaf, one eye in the cutting, so you won't always have that growing tip. So that's one big difference you'll see on URCs between foliage and bedding plants. Tissue culture is a big category for foliage. There's a lot of material that's being produced from tissue culture, some to keep disease issues down, some to keep the genetics more stable. Some of the more common varieties you will see from tissue culture are something like spathiphyllum. A lot of the philodendrons are also coming from TC. And this is very similar TC process that you would see on the bedding plant side of things. Callus cuttings. So to give a benefit to growers, customers, the stock plant producer will take the cutting at their farm, put it in prop, and start the rooting process until a callus is formed. Once that callus is formed, the cuttings are washed off and then sent to final customers to continue the rooting process at their greenhouse. So another avenue that can be done is a rooted cutting. So that same cutting that would normally go from an unrooted cutting into the propagation area at the stock farm will stay in that stock farm prop area until roots have developed. Once those roots have developed, then they are also washed off and the cutting is sent with roots to the final customer. This gives a great jump on grow times for the finished producer. And if the finished producer doesn't have a good propagation area, this can save them a lot of grief and a lot of time. Air layer is a very common method for propagation of uh, foliage items. To create an air layer, typically a stock plant will be grown, the leaves will be stripped off of the center stem, and a wound will be made on that stem. On that wound, a rooting hormone will be applied, and then it will be wrapped with aluminum foil and likely some material to keep moisture, either soil or moss. In some conditions in Costa Rica, for example, in the rainforest, they get enough rain that they only need to wrap with aluminum foil. They don't actually have to use any soil or moss in that process. Once the roots have developed, the aluminum foil is removed and the cutting is cut just below the roots and sent to the finished grower. From there, it can be planted into the finished container and grown out fairly easily with a very nice size starter material. It gives a big jump on grow times. Canes are something that definitely you don't see on the bedding plant side of things. There are quite a few plants that develop a trunk and a cane. And when these plants are grown up in the fields, they will be cut off, cut to length. Typically, wax will be put on one side and fungicide on the other side. And those canes will be shipped up to the finished customer to plant and then grow out. And typically you'll see cane sets where you'll have multiple different size canes in a shipment so that you have tiered plants within your pots. And one of the last ones that is being done in foliage side of things are stumps. What these are mother plants that have typically been growing for a while at the stock plant facility. They develop a lot of character in their age as a stock plant. The plant is cut back, dug up, so that you have that nice root structure, grow it out into a very quick finished plant with a lot of character. A lot of bonsai are created in this method. So there's a few new methods and some old methods of propagation that we see in foliage.
That's really interesting, and you're right. There are definitely some crossover inputs to bedding plants and perennials. One of the things that I'm seeing in bedding and perennials is an increase in the use of tissue culture as a starter material. Is that the case with tropicals and foliage, or has it been more common for more years than it is in other categories?
No, it's definitely growing quite a bit over the last several years. A lot of interesting varieties have popped up during the pandemic, and TC has made a very good hold on the tropical side of things.
Okay.
Still not the main tropical, but it definitely has a place in
What do
the
you think the
tropical.
most common starter material is that growers are going to receive?
It really depends on the material, but unrooted cuttings and air layers are probably some of your most common.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know. I really appreciate this run through. I think it'll be educational for a lot of the listeners and viewers as they get into this type of material. Certainly was for me. So thank you so much for your time, Andrew.
It's great being here.
I'm Bill Calkins with Tech on Demand, wishing you all the best when it comes to navigating this wild and wonderful world of tropical and foliage plants. And take care out there.